All right. All right. Welcome. Welcome. Let me just adjust the audience here so that everyone can see the video. Welcome. As I noted yesterday, that beginning Monday, June 14th, 6:30 p.m., we will begin a study on the Olivet Discourse, which is Jesus' prophecy about the coming events. It's found in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke chapter 21. And I'd like to invite you to come and see what the Bible really has to say instead of the sensationalist views that are often presented by authors such as Hal Lindsey. The dispensational premillennial view that is taught in many evangelical churches and has become almost unquestioned doctrine in some of those churches, thankfully not in the church I belong to, uh, is really a very new way of thinking in the history of the church. Recently, I heard more than one pastor warn people if something is new, it's probably not true. That's an oversimplification, and just because something's new doesn't necessarily make it untrue. But when it comes to dispensational premillennialism, it is very, very new in church history. It was pretty much invented by Edward Irving and John Darby in about 1830 and was not widely accepted by the church until it was promoted through the C.I. Scofield Bible in the early 20th century. Since then, it's become somewhat of a mainstay, as I said, amongst many fundamentalist groups and evangelical groups. Like I say, for many, an unquestioned theology. If you're familiar with it, it usually involves long, a long graph of strange events, wars, and all kinds of things happening until Christ comes back. A quote rapture, a taking away of the church occurs, and a 1,000-year Jewish millennium happens, and so on. It's a very complicated theory, and one you would have to be taught because you wouldn't find it in Scripture. It is a story that's forced into Scripture and is uh, supported by taking verses out of context. And we're going to see very carefully what Jesus was really saying in Matthew chapter 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21. Uh, there are four different ways that historically, going all the way back to the beginning of the church, that the church has understood the book of the Revelation, and with that, of course, the Olivet Discourse. One of those ways of understanding it has been called idealism. Idealism has taught that, well, these aren't real events that we see in Revelation. These aren't real events. It is a story that tells us evil will win, evil will lose, and good will win over evil in the long run. So idealism doesn't look for a real event happening. Then there is historicism. Historicism is uh, basically the view that Revelation refers to the entire events of history from Christ's first coming to his second coming, and stretches that whole history out throughout the book of Revelation, so that For example, if you see a large group uh, of beasts, they might refer to an army uh, coming against Jerusalem or some other place. It stretches the whole of history out across all of the Revelation. Uh, it really is a defunct way of looking at the Revelation. The only group that holds a historicist point of view anymore is the Seventh Day Adventists. They still hold to that uh, perspective. And then there is, of course, futurism. Futurism is it's a big category. Uh, Not all futurists are dispensational premillennialists, but futurists basically stick all of Revelation and what Jesus is saying in the Olivet Discourse all to the future. And whose future we really don't know, because if you had lived in 1000 AD, you might have thought that it was your time. And there was quite an upheaval during that time period because people looked at it that way. If you had lived in the 19th century, there were times when Jesus is coming back now, and people sold all their possessions, and of course Jesus didn't come back. And futurism, this way of looking at Revelation and such, pushes the Revelation and these prophecies into the newspaper. It's parochial. It thinks that Scripture is all about us, and we can talk more about that later. But the view that seems most satisfying contextually to Scripture is the preterist view. That's basically saying that Revelation and the Olivet Discourse refer to events that were fulfilled by the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD and the events leading up to it. The War of the Jews, as Josephus wrote the history of that event. It was a terrible event, ended up in the destruction of the temple that, of course, Jesus is referring to in the first verses of the Olivet Discourse. So we're going to look at those things and see that much of what we see in the Olivet Discourse is fulfilled. Yes, Jesus is coming again. I'll say that very clearly. Jesus is coming again at the last day of history and for judgment. But he is not coming before a literal 1,000-year reign. And we'll deal with that as time goes on. One of the strange doctrines of dispensational premillennialism is the doctrine of the rapture. And if you've watched the Left Behind series, which I've always said should be left behind, you would see an event where people just disappear. Maybe people on a plane disappear. Suddenly there's no pilot, and people disappear from cars, and people disappear around the world. And supposedly the rapture is that faithful Christians are taken out of this world in a blink of an eye, and they're gone, and all that remains are those that possibly unfaithful Christians and everyone else. And it makes for an interesting story, but it's not biblical. We won't find any scriptural support for a rapture. In fact, this catching away, this rapture theology, did not exist until 1830, and came from a Scottish lassie by the name of Margaret MacDonald. And this is well documented. It's not something that that can be faithfully argued. From his book, David McPherson writes The Rapture Plot. During springtime in 1830, an end-time vision sprang into the mind of Margaret MacDonald. Privately, she sent handwritten copies of her scripture-riddled revelation to some leading clergymen, including Edward Irving. Since Margaret had been ill and bedridden for a year and a half before her revelation, she'd had plenty of time to read and ponder the scriptures. She noticed that something happens after Matthew 24:40, taken, as well as in 2 Thessalonians 2:7, taken. Putting these two passages together, she reasoned that only after the rapture, when some would be left on earth, would the Antichrist be revealed. By the way, the Antichrist, that uh, character never appears in the Revelation. After all, if some could literally be taken out of the way via rapture, while others would be left on earth for something less desirable, was it unreasonable to tie together Matthew's taken away in 2 Thessalonians, taken out of the way? Evidently, no one, according to McPherson, uh, no one in the 18 centuries preceding her had ever taken on these two takens and tied them together and introduced this totally new escapism, which many have taken up and been taking up since 1830. Uh, we will very clearly see that the few scriptures that are used to support a rapture, a taking away, are completely taken out of context, and actually a few of them mean quite the opposite. And we'll take a look at that, and especially in Matthew chapter 24. I just want to invite you to come with me on this journey of looking through the Olivet Discourse and seeing what is really there, and not falling for the sensationalism that has literally made millionaires out of some prophecy teachers, and has made a fantastical story out of events that have much greater meaning. This whole theology takes away the lordship of Jesus Christ, this dispensational premillennialism. It suggests he's not Lord of all and on the throne today. It diminishes the church by saying that the church will fail. And it diminishes the gospel that Jesus said, it is the power of God unto salvation. So yes, I do take a different position because the Bible takes a different position, and we should not be following people. We should be very carefully evaluating what they have to say. So this is Pastor Pete. I hope you'll join us beginning Monday, June 14th at 6:30 p.m. We're going to walk ourselves through the Olivet Discourse and discuss this further. God bless.